Okay, it's just setting up. It's just preparing. Give it 1 second. It's just setting up. It's just preparing. And we're live. Hello and welcome to Kirtan London Journey to Joy podcast, episode number 8, with your hosts Madhva Anderson and Chaitanya Chintamani. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to those who are in the Zoom room with us, and welcome to those who are joining us on YouTube. To start today's episode, I'm going to go quiet straight away and pass this over to Chintamani, who's going to start us with our invocation, which is how we always start these podcasts. Chintamani.
Thank you, Madhva. So we'll just get some blessings from our teachers and everyone who's been there before us. Om Jnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. All right. So we are on chapter 4 already, and last episode we finished off the second half of chapter 3, which talks about karma yoga. So we talked about how it's better to work than to renounce all action, and how we should be finding our work according to our true natures and offering that as a service to the divine, and how that gives real freedom and true happiness. We talked about how, some people don't know this and they are not to be disturbed because they will find their way eventually. And that led to an interesting discussion about taking advice and asking questions in a way that shows sincerity. And we talked about the stereotypical ask hole and other things. And then what else did we discuss? I think that was it. Well, I'm sure there was more.
Don't worry, they'll have to go watch it if they want to know.
If you want to know, please go and watch it. Yes. So that brings us to chapter 4, which is called Transcendental Knowledge.
Tell us more, Chintamani. Kick us off about Transcendental Knowledge, chapter 4 of the Bhagavad Gita.
So chapter 4 kicks off with Krishna telling Arjuna quite an incredible fact, that the first time he spoke Bhagavad Gita was to the sun god, many thousands of years before he and Arjuna had ever met. So then he talks about how important it is to pass this knowledge down from person to person in an unbroken chain.
Amazing. So what I'm hearing you say is he's talking about the origin of the Gita.
Right.
And what's interesting is that we understand in the modern context of history that the Gita was spoken 5,000 years ago from
Mhm.
Krishna to Arjuna. But what Krishna is saying here is actually, originally I spoke this knowledge to the sun god, who here is called Vivasvan. And that was at the beginning of creation. That was millennia ago.
Right.
So there's lots of interesting things about that already for us
Yeah.
to conversate about.
Yeah, because it's kind of like, hold up, you were talking to the sun. It's really quite incredible. But as we have said, that Krishna is divine, and so yes, he was talking to the sun god, and for him that's not such a big deal.
It's funny. I was listening to a lecture today. Sorry, Chintamani. Were you in the middle of a sentence?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. I was listening to a lecture today by Srila Prabhupada,
Hmm.
the author of the book. And he was talking about this idea that he was picking up on this point you just said. You're saying, well, Krishna was talking to the sun. I know it sounds incredible, but he's God, right? So, but then he was explaining how, think about it. It's foolish to think that there's no life anywhere other than the earth. It's foolish to believe that. So here on the earth planet, what are our bodies made of? Elements of the earth, mainly water, earth. You could say there's some element of Agni, fire, but generally we're earth creatures. Our bodies are made of the same elements that this planet is made of, and we have a body which is conducive for living in this planet. But then what about animals that live in the water? They have bodies that are conducive for living in the water. There are even creatures whose bodies are suitable for living in fire. They have bodies made of flame or made of those elements which are suitable to exist in that setting. And so even on the sun planet, there are living entities. It's not to think that there's nothing alive on the sun planet just because it's fire. They have a different type of body suitable to that environment. Right. And so he explains how essentially it's not ridiculous to be thinking along these lines. Is when you think outside the box a little bit from the standard closed-minded approach that we often see, just not due to anything other than not thinking about things sometimes. When you actually think about it, it can even make sense.
Right. And then of course, anywhere where there's any sort of living beings, there has to be a leader, a king. So yeah, there was a sun god, is a sun god named Vivasvan, and he also received instructions from Krishna.
Right. So Prabhupada, he talks in the purport, he explains about why he gave it to Vivasvan, or AKA, I've always called the sun god Surya.
Yeah.
So,
he has a lot of names.
Right. These personalities all have many, many names, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So anyway, Vivasvan, because he's the king of the planets. Now, I was actually a little confused at first when I heard that, because Krishna is saying, I'm giving it first to Vivasvan, who's the king of the planets, the highest amongst the planets, amongst which the earth is one of those planets, right?
Right.
And so he gives it to the topmost of this line, or this group, planetary group. And at first I was confused because I thought, well, Surya is not the king of the demigods. So we're gonna have more of this conversation about demigods later, by the way. But for now, bear with me. So Surya is not the king of the demigods. That was Indra. Why didn't he say it to Indra? And then I realized, no, he's talking about the planets. He's the king of the planets. And as humans living on Earth, we're a part of the planetary system. And so that's why this is the line that Krishna took. He spoke it first to Surya. Surya then spoke it to Manu, who is the father of mankind here on Earth. And then Manu spoke it to his son, King Ikshvaku. And that was how it was passed down to us, essentially. Awesome. Now, then it made sense when I realized in context about king of the planets, not king of the demigods. Hey, welcome to those who've joined us in the Zoom room, by the way. Nice to see you. Egil,
Hey, everybody.
and Nutan as well. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, hi. Nice.
So yeah,
Right.
so we're talking a lot about something right now, which in Vedic language is called parampara.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you'd like to elaborate a little bit about parampara.
So parampara is a system of transferring knowledge from one person to another without changing it, without embellishing it, or diluting it. From teacher to disciple. As the times change, then there's a new teacher, so that the knowledge lives on and can be given to the people in general. That system of, giving it unbroken from one to another, that's called parampara.
How does that compare to Western system of gaining knowledge?
Well, Western system of gaining knowledge would be like going to school or what else is there? Media nowadays. But
I guess I was thinking more about the science as a means of gaining knowledge. I guess that was more the angle that I was coming at.
No, you're right. So as opposed to sort of starting from the bottom and working with elements that you can perceive with your senses. Science is based on what we can humanly perceive.
Right.
And that, of course, has many, many limitations. We can't even see the back of our own heads, for example. But,
thank God I'm losing hair back there. It's not a pretty sight anymore.
Yeah, but still, science is to be applauded for making many attempts despite their sensual limitations.
Hey, maybe science can help me with that losing hair at the back of my head as well.
They definitely can.
I'm just going to go bald graciously.
What they can't help you with is who is God, because the understanding of spiritual life and the divine are beyond our senses and our material capabilities.
Right. They can't help us with transcendental knowledge.
Very nice. So yeah, so science is limited in that way, and the best way to understand that is parampara. So Krishna, who is God himself, while we're discussing here, has given this knowledge to Manu, to Vivasvan, who gave it to Manu, who gave it to his son, and so on like that, unbroken, unchanged, so that we could hear it. And Prabhupada talks about, like in Sri Upanishad, he talks about how the Veda is the mother. So if you want to know, the knowledge is like the mother. So if you want to know who your father is, you ask your mother, right? If you try to like find out by some other means, it's going to take you a lot longer and much more difficult, but you can simply just open the book, find the knowledge that's been handed down, and that will tell you all about Krishna, the divine, the source. So like that, parampara is much more effective for receiving this type of knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. I like this. I'm just trying to think if there are any potential questions that might come up about this. Because okay, let's just argue science's corner here for a second. We go based off what we can see, and we can do experiments to prove what we know. Whereas with this, we're just having to place our faith in someone that they're telling us something is true, and then we just have to believe it.
Right.
Threw a curveball at you there, Chintamani.
I feel like you already know the answer, so I'm gonna.
Well, I'm thinking it through. I'm just thinking it through out loud. Of course, we have our own understanding. What would you say to that?
Well, you see, the knowledge isn't just handed down to anyone. It's handed to a person who's empowered. So, yes, does require a little bit of faith, and I do like to think that the way that we perceive the world usually is like seeing is believing. You see it, and then you believe it. But spiritually, it's kind of the opposite. You believe, then you'll see. It becomes clearer to you the more open your heart is, the more open the more you understand, and the more deeper your understanding goes, these things become revealed internally. So it is a different style of absorbing knowledge, definitely. And people nowadays find it a little more difficult because it requires some humility and some faith to be able to receive it properly.
Yeah, I actually read that. There's some need to accept that we don't know everything, need to accept that we need a teacher who does know more than us. And that requires humility to accept that. I also think you need faith anyway to believe in science as well.
Yes.
There's a leap of faith with this. It talks about, I guess there's something here about how do we accept knowledge? Where do we accept where do we place our faith in knowledge? And so there's the typical Western minded approach now, which is all about, to me, it's a very patriarchal way of taking knowledge, in the sense that there's an unhealthy masculine energy in the way that we perceive reality. So what I mean by that is it's all about facts and figures. Can you prove something? Can we historically date something to the exact century that it was, and even better, the exact year it was, or something like that? And if you can't, well, its historical efficacy is questionable. And we need to be able to, like you said, seeing is believing. If we can't do an experiment to prove its truth, then, well, it's not true. So there's this very, very patriarchal mentality, which we don't see so much of in the East. They have a very different mentality, a very different mindset to their absorption of knowledge and their acceptance of truth. So we see a much more experience-based perception of truth. So
it's
I'm
very
learning.
broad.
Yeah. So I might be studying. I'm studying this knowledge, this spiritual knowledge, which I'm being told is meant to uplift my life. I'm being told is meant to lead me to happiness, to contentment, to humility, to compassion. And so what is it that verifies this truth for me is my experience of the development of these qualities. Am I developing these qualities? Is the person who's telling me this, do they have these qualities? Are the people who are passing this knowledge down to me, do I see in them unexplainable humility? Do I see in them extreme compassion, love, kindness, etc.? All of these qualities that we aspire for, that we accept make us happy. And so there's that is more our means of, I think the word is veracity. Is that a word? Verifying, of accepting as true. It's more experiential. Mm-hmm. Plus, there's also faith in science. Who's actually seen physically with their eyes the distance between here and the moon? You hear a figure. I'm just using that as a complete random example here. It's a complete random example, but it makes a point that no one's physically with their eyes seen it. So we have all this apparatus that some scientist somewhere in a lab has said this is true, and people accept it blindly. Yes, then it's true. This guy said it's true based off his, etc. So there's faith there as well.
Mm.
There's faith either way, whichever way you look at it. It's just the question is, where do you want to place your faith? And for what reason do you want to place your faith there?
Right.
That plays into, to me, that plays a large part of this. And I could say for myself, experientially, this Vedantic philosophy, this Bhakti yoga makes a lot of sense to me and gives me faith that it's something that I should continue to pursue and try to understand deeper.
That's so nicely, you've packaged it so nicely.
Thanks, Chintamani.
Yeah. And it's really interesting what you've said about it being patriarchal. I've never thought about that before. But it's quite interesting to think about it that way.
I've been well trained, Chintamani. Sundari, my wife, for those of you that know her, she's studied a lot. She's, as in a woman's body, she's explored what her womanhood is and means and so many things like that. And so I hear a lot of it coming from her. And so I've learned a lot, basically. But it's so true. We live in such a patriarchal society. I actually read in a really interesting book. There's a really wonderful book by one of our own Bhakti teachers. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, Bhakti Tirtha Swami.
Oh.
You know what's really interesting? So he was a sannyasi, which means a renounced celibate spiritual teacher in our Bhakti movement. And he wrote many books about Krishna consciousness in such practical ways. He was so connected, so loving, so personal. And he took these very elevated spiritual teachings, which can sometimes seem very lofty and unachievable. He made them so relatable, practical, and real for people. And he was so compassionate and kind. And he really lived all of those principles. And he wrote many books, one of which was called Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness. And in his, this was many years ago, he wrote this. In that book, he also talks about this, which I found really shocking, because until then, I'd only heard terms like patriarchy and an unhealthy masculine energy being spoken about in circles outside of our own Bhakti community, and primarily amongst female circles. There were also men as well propagating this kind of information. It's interesting because it felt like, as I was being exposed to it, it felt like a healthy approach to what you could call feminism, which is this idea of we've been hurt, let's establish some equality here, but a very healthy approach to it. And it was really interesting to hear that coming from Sundari, and I was learning a lot. And then anyway, I read in this book by Bhakti Tirtha Swami, who was a man, not only a man, but a Vedic man and he was writing that currently we have an unhealthy imbalance of masculine energy in the world. And it refers to this patriarchal mentality of rules and regulations and this and structure and etc. etc. Mm-hmm. We've lost touch with our feminine energy. We've lost touch with our ability to have intuition, to connect with our heart and connect with, so like this. And he said that it's both on men and women. It's on both of us to balance that energy, because we both have masculine and feminine energy within us. I completely digress, as I always do, but
no, it's very nice. It's very, very nice.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a really good book. I probably didn't explain it very well, but it's called Leadership for an Age of High Consciousness by Bhakti Tirtha Swami. If anyone would like to read it, it's a fantastic read.
Super.
Well, there was one other point here, Chintamani, that I wanted to bring up unless you wanted to say anything on that.
Please bring it up.
Okay, so it was this idea of Krishna's shared the Bhagavad Gita multiple times, or at least twice, as we're being told here.
Mm-hmm.
So once to Vivasvan, millennia ago, and a second time to Arjuna, 5,000 years ago. So what this tells us is that the Vedic perception of time is cyclical versus linear. So what we see, to my understanding, I believe this to be true, within the Abrahamic faiths and also with science, there's a linear perception of time. There's a beginning and there's an end. And generally what we see as well is that we're starting off at the bottom and we gradually are moving toward the top. So whether it's the scientific perspective, the bottom being there was nothing in the beginning, and now we're moving toward an advanced, knowledgeable, intelligent, continuously advancing civilization. And so we're marching toward greater and greater things until the end of time. And the Abrahamic perspective is that we're also marching gradually toward salvation, or the end of time, where we reach utopia or whatever it may be. So it's a linear perspective versus the Vedic perspective, or the Eastern perspective, which is a cyclical concept of time. There's no real beginning to time, nor is there an end. It's a really difficult point to understand, to comprehend for the mind. There's no beginning and there's no end. But there are just cycles. So there may appear to be a beginning, but it's just the beginning of this cycle. This cycle will come to an end and another cycle will begin, and so on and so forth. And they call these time periods yugas. So right now we're in a particular time period called Kali Yuga. And that explains why some people say the Bhagavad Gita is only 5,000 years old, whereas some people say, no, it's eternal. It's always been there. Because the knowledge was always there, but things can come and go. So it can also get lost, or it was not lost, but for a long time it was extant, which means it was just surviving, just about surviving this knowledge within human society. Right. And then Krishna came 5,000 years ago and reestablished this knowledge. I'm really red. I wonder why I'm so warm. Let me take this hoodie off.
Right.
So
yeah,
that's an interesting point as well, this idea of time.
Yeah, time in a circle as opposed to time in a line. And it kind of takes the ground out from beneath your feet when you really think about it. There's no beginning and there is no end. When you said that, I was just kind of like, whoa.
So hard to understand, isn't it?
Yeah.
At
But,
the same time, it feels... Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, the more you get into Vedic literature and trying to understand their concept of time and the way it all works, the more it makes sense, and the more it becomes easier to have a sort of concept of. All the figures are there of how long each yuga is and so on, and then you start to hear the stories and you can kind of place which yuga they were in and stuff like that. So it's very, very detailed, but it's also not without its apparent contradictions.
Yeah, there are things which are really outside of our ability to comprehend sometimes.
Right.
And time is definitely one of those things.
Definitely.
But at the same time, it makes sense. What was before the beginning? Right? Is just things are incomprehensible. Yeah. It's just a fact of life. So, but the Vedic perspective is very all-encompassing in terms of its explanations for all of these difficult to understand things. They might be a little bit out of our outside of our ability to comprehend, but from one perspective, they make sense as well.
Mm.
Life is eternal. That is a thing that makes sense, although it's difficult to comprehend. Where did we come from? Where are we going? Anyway, again, this is a whole other conversation that we could get into, but yes, your point is true. Some of these things can be very, very difficult to understand.
I had to laugh there because I always, whenever anyone says, where did they come from? I think of Cotton Eye Joe. And my mind, I just went there for a second. Sorry.
Okay, so you have to sing that now.
No.
Can we? Okay, so I was just feeling we should just, I feel like we can still fully wrap up or just unpack slightly more this concept of parampara.
Ananta agrees.
Ananta. Where did they come from? No, I'm not going to do it.
Cotton Eye Joe.
Oh my God.
Sorry.
Sorry, everyone. That was my fault. This idea of parampara, this idea of how does knowledge come down? So it comes from you actually mentioned this, but it comes from qualified teacher to qualified teacher in an unbroken line, which we call disciplic succession, or from teacher to disciple, etc., aka parampara, the Vedic terminology. Starting with Krishna. He's the original source of this knowledge, of this information, which means that the knowledge is perfect. So like you said, if you want to know who your mother is, you ask your father, or vice versa. You want to know who your father is, you ask your mother, because they have perfect knowledge already. And so like that, we immediately attain perfect knowledge. And so this is how we accept knowledge versus the scientific approach. And again, this is not to bash science. Science has a place. Science has done so much. It seems like there's a clash here. And I think that comes from the fact that a lot of the time we see the scientific perspective arguing against the existence of God. So there seems to be some clash there. But anyway, generally the scientific perspective is also claiming that it's the ultimate knowledge, right? This is the ultimate knowledge. And what Krishna is saying is, no, this is the ultimate knowledge. The Gita is the ultimate knowledge. And I think for any honest person, we have to accept that science can never be the ultimate knowledge because it's constantly evolving, which means that what science was claiming to be true even 20 years ago, many of those things will already have been disproven now, and there'll be a new truth. Because we're limited on what we can learn. We're limited on what we can see, and we're just limited in so many ways. And so how can we ever expect to learn the full truth when we're starting with so many limitations? And Krishna is saying you can understand the full truth. You can attain perfect knowledge, or like this chapter is titled, transcendental knowledge. If you go to the right source, if you go to the right place to learn it. And we're being told here that this is coming directly from Krishna, and it's being passed down through an unbroken line of teachers who are sharing this perfect knowledge.
Nice.
Any thoughts on that?
No, I like it very much. That's I'm good with it.
I'm good with it. Nice. I feel like that wraps quite nicely this part of chapter 4, which talks about the parampara, the eternal knowledge, the eternal education system. So, should we move on?
Let's.
What's next, Chintamani?
I'm remembering that Sutapa Prabhu outlined some common misunderstandings
Correct. So verses 11, 12, and 13.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So another wonderful spiritual teacher and guide, whose name is Sutapa Prabhu, he's actually created a very concise explanation of the entire Bhagavad Gita, which we pull a lot of our stuff from through these podcasts. And so I'll actually just read a brief sentence from one of his paragraphs here. So he's talking about how he says accurate understanding. That's what it's titled. And he says, most people know something about religion and something about God, but their understanding can often be quite hazy and confused. However, when transcendental knowledge is received through the eternal education system, the parampara that we've just spoken about, one gains an accurate understanding. So one can actually learn about God in an accurate way. And then he says, in 3 verses, Krishna clears up 3 common misunderstandings about Eastern spirituality. So verse 11 clears up the misconception that all spiritual paths lead to the same destination. Now, this is a really interesting point, because in Bhakti Yoga, what's very beautiful about Bhakti Yoga or Krishna consciousness is that we don't claim a monopoly on God. Right?
Right.
It's not our way or the highway. It's not Krishna or hell. That's not the Vedic understanding, that we're so close-minded, narrow-minded, that if you don't accept a relationship with God in the same way that I accept a relationship with God, you're wrong and you're going to hell,
To
brother,
burn.
sister, to burn forever. It doesn't make a lot of sense, actually.
No.
So the Vedic perspective, the Bhakti perspective, is that a relationship with Krishna is personal. And so I may call God Krishna, or I may perceive the divine as Radha Krishna, because that's how we understand God, is it's both masculine and feminine in their Radha and Krishna forms. And someone else may relate to God as, for example, Allah, which means Almighty. Allah just means Almighty.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're having a relationship with the divine within their heart, who they refer to as Allah, Almighty. And this is also accepted as something genuine, something real, because it's ultimately our relationship with God is within our heart. It's something that we cultivate, which is personal, right?
Right.
But that doesn't mean, because there's another line of thought that we sometimes hear, which is everything is one. Everything is the same. Ultimately, everything is the same. Everything is one. So that's not our understanding either. So although we have a very open-minded view of God consciousness, Prabhupada also clarifies, or Krishna rather also clarifies, that it's not that everything is the same. And so in this verse number 11, I'll just read it. So this is verse number 11 of chapter 4 of the Gita. Krishna says to Arjuna, as they seek my shelter, so I reveal to them my love. All beings everywhere are on my path. So if I asked you to unpack that, Chintamani, what would you say?
The first thing that hits me is that Krishna is a being of reciprocity. So, what we give, we receive, as he says, and we receive accordingly. Yes. And then he says, everyone follows my path in all respects. So, everyone attains Krishna, but they might do so in a different way, in a different procedure, different life path. And But I guess what's the same then is the connection and the individual attainment of the ultimate. What's ultimate to that individual soul, the ultimate being Krishna, but that it's not the same for everyone.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's unique then about Krishna consciousness is that we're seeking a relationship based on intimate love with the divine.
Mhm.
That's the ultimate goal of our bhakti yoga practice. So bhakti means loving devotion. That's what bhakti, one translation of that word, bhakti, loving devotion. And yoga is connection. So this is about reconnecting with the divine through loving devotion.
Yes.
Surrendering ourselves to Radha and Krishna. And so we have that as our ultimate goal of our spiritual practice. Not everyone has that as their ultimate goal of their spiritual practice.
No.
So there may be faiths who have a spiritual practice or a religious faith where actually their goal is closer to awe and reverence. And my understanding, this is of course not true for everyone. For all, I'm going to use Christianity as the example here. Of course, I can't paint everyone with the same brush. I don't know every Christian, and I'm sure there are many Christians who do in many ways have a similar faith to, you could almost call them Vaishnavas, bhakti yogis, that their mood is so similar to our mood. But I definitely see a predominance of awe and reverence in their relationship with God, the Almighty Father. They're God-fearing.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have a spiritual practice, but it's different. It's a different spiritual practice. They have different practices and different ultimate goals, different beliefs, slightly different faith, which is going to lead them somewhere else, basically, right?
Yeah.
It's not that it's going to lead them to the exact same place that someone on the path of bhakti yoga will achieve. Why? Because they have a different goal. If I'm going to the gym and I'm working my biceps 24/7, you might be going to the gym as well, but you're doing, I don't know, shoulders. Then we're gonna achieve different goals at the end of that, even though we're both going to the gym.
Right.
So that's kind of how I understand it, is that we sometimes hear this brush, everything is one, everything is the same.
Mm.
In one sense, you can say there's truth to that, but actually there are differences. And it's not to say that one person is right or wrong. It's just to say that they're different. It's just to say that based off your practice and your faith and what your ultimate goal is, you'll reach a different destination to me if I'm doing something different to you, which makes sense.
Hmm.
Right?
It's a very individual thing.
Exactly. Our relationship with God is personal. We're personalists. Actually, you can categorize different types of Eastern spirituality in these two categories. One way of categorizing Eastern spirituality is like this. You have the impersonalist approach, which typically says that everything is one. We're all one. Ultimately, we're all God. You're God. I'm God. Ananda, Egel, Ananta, Nutan. We're all God because we're all one. They have this concept that we're just like air that's trapped in a clay pot. And when you break the clay pot, the air joins back to the air of the universe. And that's like our experience now.
Mm-hmm.
That's one perspective. That's one belief system that exists. And that's called the impersonal approach, because there's no personalism. Everyone's one. Who have you got to be personal with? But the Krishna conscious perspective is very personal. We have a relationship with the divine, with Radha and with Krishna, which is personal to us, which means my relationship is going to be different to yours. Your relationship is going to be different to Nutan's. or to Stella. We've got Stella joining us live on YouTube.
Hi.
A few people with us live on YouTube. We've got Stella and Rakesh that I can see, at least, and Aniruddha as well.
Nice.
So, yeah, personalism, tangent. Forget where I was going.
All right. So all paths are not the same.
All paths are not the same. Exactly. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that was text number 11.
And the
Do you
next
have...
misunderstanding?
Sorry?
What was the next misconception that Sutapa outlines?
So verse 12 addresses the misconception that Eastern scriptures talk of polytheism and worship many gods. So this is a misconception.
Yeah.
Go for it, Chintamani. Tell them how it is.
I think a lot of people, when they want to take the mick out of like Eastern philosophy and Hinduism, then they get into like, oh, they have so many gods and all the gods have so many arms and they don't even know which god is which and da 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 da.
Some people actually do feel like that. Some... Anyway, whatever. I don't want to offend anyone.
Yeah, but so at least Hinduism itself is many branched, and from the Bhakti perspective, then we are in the business of what is called, oh dear help me, polymorphic monotheism, right?
You got it.
Woo-hoo.
I think so. I think that's what we talked about this earlier, and we both agreed that's what we think it's called.
It was foggy back then, and it's still foggy. So polymorphic monotheism, meaning that it's not polytheism, which is like many gods, and each god is just as important as the other god, and it's all, you can just sort of pick and choose which god you need at any particular time. And it's not entirely monotheism either, because what we have here is polymorphic monotheism, meaning that, yes, we have one God who has many, many forms, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Krishna comes in many, many different, we would say, avatars, or and he has many different ways of interacting with living beings, and it's done in such a way so that everyone's nature can connect to Krishna through these different facets of his personality and being. Is that clear? I don't know if that's clear or not.
To me, it was. I don't know if there was anything you wanted to elaborate on, but it sounded clear to me.
Right. So then what are demigods? Right?
Yeah.
So demigods are an important part of our creation, but they're not supreme. They are like ministers working under a king. So they each have their areas of expertise which they are given to govern. As we talked before about, for example, the heavenly bodies, planets, the sun, the moon, the wind, there's Indra of heaven and like that. So they all have their different areas to focus on, which they're in charge of. And that brings us to our relationship with them, which is, obviously we respect these beings because, from them is coming our natural amenities, resources, such as rain, you know, the
Light.
vegetables and fruit from the earth, light, the ocean, fire, all these things which we are using, utilizing. So we do owe them a debt which is paid by ultimately sacrifice. And
like human sacrifice?
no. So well, for some civilizations, sure.
Sorry,
but not for us.
couldn't help myself. You mean who? Who are we sacrificing?
Yeah, but
Ananta's next.
Sorry, Ananta. Yeah.
No, we can't sacrifice Ananta. He's too nice.
We actually need him for a couple things. So
yeah, he needs to do some stuff still as well. So you're safe, Ananta. You can stay.
Ananta's out.
He left the Zoom call.
Oh, right. So sacrifice. Yes. So there's a help me out here a little, Madhav, because I'm
So okay, yeah. So what I mean, let me just recap what you were saying. You were saying how we're monotheistic. So we believe in one God, but that one God is polymorphic. He can take on different forms. But it's also very specific about which forms he has. For example, in the Hindu faith, there are many demigods, like you mentioned, not all of whom are avatars of Krishna. We call them demigods, which means that they hold a status, a position of power within the universe greater than our own. So like you said, what we've already heard about Vivasvan, who's the sun god. Then Nanta said, I'm off. No way, I'm coming to Leicester again. No, we already established that you were useful, Ananta, so you're okay. You can come to Leicester. So I was hearing you say that. So, for example, we hear, just to elaborate on this, we hear some people say, yeah, everyone is God. Krishna, yes, of course, he's God. Ganesh, also God. Durga, also God. Hanuman, also God. Everyone is God. So sorry, that was very inappropriate that I did it. Anyway, that's what we hear. I've heard that many times, so that I just repeated what I've heard. So forgive my offenses. And what we're saying is, no, this is not the case. These are jivas. Jivas mean souls who are separate from God. We're living entities, and Krishna is God. But Krishna does come in some forms in different times, in different places, based on the circumstances, because again, time is eternal. Let's just put that out there again. And so at some point in time, he appeared as Lord Ram, for example, right? At another point in history, because at different points throughout history, which again is eternal, mind blown, Krishna comes to the material world to enact his pastimes, or to reestablish religion, or to protect his devotees, etc. So for that reason, we see different expansions of Krishna, but their original source is Krishna. And so therefore it's monotheistic. It's not saying that there are many different people who are all God. No, there are polymorphic expansions of one God, but even those, it's not just everyone a blanket. Everyone is God. And then you were saying how there are demigods. So people like Indra, who's the king of heaven, or Vivasvan, or the god of water, or the god of fire, who all, Agni, Vayu, the god of wind, whoever they may be. And they have positions of power, and they maintain this material universe in different ways. So Indra provides rain, Vayu provides the earth, wind, Varun provides water, Vivasvan or Surya provides the sun for heat and light, etc. All these things that allow us to live and maintain ourselves on this planet. And therefore, we owe them a debt of gratitude and a physical debt, which we pay through sacrifice.
Right. But not human sacrifice.
Which we pay through sacrifice. So then what is that sacrifice is the question, because that sounds a bit like, what do you mean? I just because I'm alive, I have to got all these debts I have to pay, I have to do all this sacrifice for all these random demigods. So
it is very unfortunate, yes.
So what is the sacrifice? That's the next question that I would have thought.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I don't know if that was an inspiring moment to pass it back to you, or if you wanted me to elaborate on my thoughts on that.
I can explain sacrifice, I guess.
Okay, nice.
So sacrifice, it's just like when it's your mom's birthday and you're a kid and she's given you pocket money, and then you go and buy something with that money and give it to her. Basically, she bought it, but your act of offering it is very thoughtful and well received, right?
Right.
So sacrifices like that, all the amenities, resources which we have, we must offer it back, even though ultimately it was provided by the persons that we are offering it to. And the way that we do that is through the medium of fire. So if you decide or happen to go deeper into the Bhakti tradition, you'll see from time to time a sacrifice happening where everyone is sitting around a beautifully decorated bonfire, so to speak. But the bonfire itself has been blessed, so it's imbued with the presence of these demigods by the power of mantra. So what happens is, with mantra, one by one, you may call a demigod to accept an offering, and then into the fire you put ghee, or butter, as it were. So that's the kind of method. And you might have seen it before, where like there's a fire and then there's a priest and he's pouring into the fire and everyone's chanting around. That's sacrifice. Now, that's very well and good, and a certain type of pious person will perform these sacrifices from time to time. And they will receive good results from doing that. So if they require, for example, a child, or if they require rain for their crops or anything like that, they will perform a sacrifice in order to receive these benefits from the demigods. However, the little issue that you have is that comes with a certain amount of karmic reactions. It's not a free transaction. There's still a reaction to be had from that, whatever it may be. But it will bind you further to material existence. So
why is that?
Why is that? Well, because it's between limited beings. The demigods still have a limit to what they can give you. They can't liberate you from the material existence. They can only provide you with more material resources that will cover you further and keep you bound. So if you decide to liberate yourself from material existence and to go higher, then this particular act of sacrifice has to also be refined.
Right. I guess I thought it was also because we're asking for something material, right? So we're asking, generally those engagements, they're like business negotiations. Yeah. So I do this for you, you do this for me, and it's based off some selfish motive.
Right.
Which is entangling. Although it might be intelligent selfish motives, I wouldn't call it quite enlightened. I would call it intelligent selfishness. That we have this concept of yajna, sacrifice,
Mm-hmm.
for our benefit in the future, it's still a material desire. It's still a selfish desire, and therefore we're accumulating good karma, which is still
Right.
binding us to this world, versus transcendental activity, like you said, going higher and doing something to please Krishna.
Right.
I wanted to contribute about the example of sacrifice, how it could be.
Ego,
If
yes,
you don't mind.
please.
Yeah, that I
Yeah,
was
you're the first person
contemplating
to do this.
all this time.
So cool.
I think following the example, mother and the child, child, yes, he can buy something from mom, but also he can do not give anything material. He can make his mom proud how well he is learning, growing, and respecting people, how he's learning from his mom and respecting his mom as an institution. So the same we can so give in a more sophisticated form, co-create with the mom. So for example, we can offer, let's say for Varun, for water element, if we want to establish better relationship, we can see as a personality. And to do something, a nice favor, like make a simple choice to use biodegradable product. So I produce less harm, I throw away less harm, toxic into the environment. It may seem something simple, but it's kind of a big move. Or at least volunteer in some organization that supports cleaning the waters or something like that, going and blessing the river. I think we don't need, people often think about sacrifice as something very spiritual, something very complicated, or that requires the priest or requires something special skill or knowledge. I don't think so. It can be as simple as that. Simple choices that we make every day life, coexisting with the universe, with all the powers of nature, living in peace, in respect. Respecting the nature, like what a big sacrifice it is. The ascesis, instead of being selfish and consuming, I consume less. I can be thoughtful. Am I throwing away the food? Am I wasting the water? It's like it's the God, part of God's, different gods. They are responsible. They're giving that. So we can think of if we are committing offense with little everyday choices. I think that's also today's sacrifice. We don't need even to put things in a fire or chant something complicated. I think everyone can. And
that's so
beautiful. Mm-hmm.
What a lovely thought.
So beautiful. I think it's the first time I've heard from you, Egil, and it was such a nice, beautiful contribution to this conversation. So true. It can be so simple like that as well. Doesn't have to be overcomplicated.
No, that's really a lovely thought.
It was also making me think, because one of the things that, thank you for that, Egil. It was also making me think that because I, for example, am not qualified to do these fire yajnas, etc., and these other things anyway. Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Chintamani, but my understanding of this was also that there's another aspect of sacrifice as well, which is recommended for us. So as well as the potential to perform fire yajnas, which is one thing, or to have a priest do that on our behalf, which we can also do, or to look at it from the perspective of doing simple acts of kindness in reciprocation with these sacred deities. So not polluting the earth, whether it's the earth or the oceans or things like that. These are also sacrifices that we do to reciprocate with these demigods. Is that the ultimate sacrifice for us in this day and age of Kali Yuga, where our intelligence is very limited, our ability is very limited. So again, in the Vedic perception of time, we're now in a period of time which is understood to be less able than previous ages.
Right.
So our intelligence levels are not capable of performing such complex sacrifices anyway, generally, because in previous ages, they were so capable of these types of activities. They were more advanced, basically. They could use mantra to ignite flame just with mantra, or they could create weapons. The Kshatriyas, or the warriors of that time, of times gone by, were able to create weapons of mass destruction simply with mantras, which we don't have those capabilities anymore. We've lost that intelligence. But in the Gita, Prabhupada explains, actually our sacrifice is chanting the names of the divine. That's the greatest form of sacrifice that we can do in today's day and age. Harinam, 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 Eva Kevalam, Kalona Steva, Nasteva, Nasteva Gatiranyataha, which means the holy name is the only way. The holy name is the only way. So chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, which is the mantra which anyone who follows Kirtan London knows that we love to chant. And that's actually sacrifice. That's a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And that sacrifice, sorry, I'm nearly done. That sacrifice goes to the root of the tree, which is Krishna. Because ultimately all the demigods are his subsidiary departments anyway. And if you go to the root of the tree, then all the leaves and branches become nourished and satisfied as well. So if we're pleasing Krishna, then all the other demigods are happy anyway. If we're doing this one sacrifice of trying to reignite or reconnect this loving relationship with Krishna, particularly through chanting the holy name and hearing, like we're doing Shravanam, Kirtanam, so hearing these divine recitations as well.
Yes. Yes, and ultimately, just to tie that up, then that level of sacrifice, which is directly involving Krishna and sort of looks to be bypassing the demigods, but is actually pleasing them even more, just like watering the root of a tree, as you said. That act is the one act which is able to liberate a living person from material existence, rather than further entangling them.
Nice discussion, man. Nice discussion, guys. Okay, so I actually think we thought we were going to get through the whole chapter today. I was just thinking maybe we could do this last misconception that Sutapa addresses and then finish with Kirtan.
Yes, please.
Okay, so cool. So we've addressed 2 misconceptions already.
Right.
Recap of those in case anyone forgets. So the first one was that all spiritual paths lead to the same destination. The second one is that we are polytheistic. We are not. We're polymorphic monotheistic.
Nice.
And the last misconception, which verse 13 addresses, is the caste system and the unfair, exploitative nature of the caste system.
Right.
So verse 13, let's just read it. It says this: according to their natures and work, I divided humans into 4 classes. Yet though I did this, know that I am changeless and do nothing. So, quick discussion here. I don't think this needs to take too long. I don't like the podcast to be too long anyway, in that sense. So we don't have to spend too long on this, but just to touch on this. For those of you who may or may not know, in India, there's what we know as a caste system. And it has been and often is very exploitative, which means that there are 4 castes. So you have the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Shudras, which basically means the teachers, the fighters or the ruling class, and then you have the merchants or the entrepreneurs is possibly another way to call it, or the people who business minded, and then you have the working class people who generally are employed and work for people, etc. So these are the 4 classes. But in India, this is a very rigid system, and it can become very, very abusive. And here we're seeing, and it's all done based on birth. So there's no element of what's my nature, who am I, what are my capabilities, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, what is my actual nature, how am I set up internally as a person. All of that is almost disregarded based off just birth. So here Krishna clarifies that it's based off people's, firstly, there are different types of people, but it's not based off birth. It's based off our nature. And that this system is also not there to be exploitative. It's there to create a healthy working, what's the word? Symbiotic society of people supporting each other. And it's, yeah, so that, anyway, what are your thoughts, Chintamani?
That's pretty clear. I think you explained it nicely. It's
right. Sorry, I stuttering there at the end because I felt like that. I felt like I said everything in a short sentence.
No, I think
it was just said.
Nailed it.
Okay. Okay. I was like, I should say more, but no, I just said it.
Yeah, it's fine. It's in the capsule. It's good.
There's more that could be said, but I think that summarizes essentially that topic without going into too much detail.
Awesome.
Okay, so we didn't finish chapter 4, I don't think.
Did we not?
I think there's a little more, but anyway, we can figure that out. We can figure that out later. We can put out. We'll advertise at some point next week or so what the next episode is going to be about. We'll go away and we'll confer, and then we'll figure that out. I just want to again say thank you to Egol, Nutan, and Antanananda for joining us here live. It's been very cool to have you. And after we've wrapped up, if you're still around, we can just connect briefly as well. And thank you to those who are listening on YouTube. We do these podcasts more or less twice a month. It's every second and fourth Wednesday of the month. And we're systematically going through this book, the Bhagavad Gita, which is a sacred literature, a guidebook for living a life of fulfillment and ultimately perfecting our lives. We say this sometimes, enlightened self-interest. We're trying to be happy, but a lot of people don't know how to be happy, right? That's why we see so many people who aren't happy, and we don't know how to do it. Not taught in school how to be happy. So this is a guidebook for that, actually. Anyway, so that's what we're doing. Every second and fourth Wednesday of the month, we do it live on Zoom. We also stream it to YouTube. And we encourage people to join us here in Zoom, because that way we can always discuss things, we can ask questions, we can get engaged. And so we're creating a community of people who want to go a little bit deeper in their lives, who are seeking something greater and are looking for a space to do that with like-minded people. And so please come and join us. We can create a family, we can create a community, and we can go on this journey together, because it's definitely a journey to joy.
Journey to joy.
And it's definitely not me and Chintamani being teachers. We are also doing this journey, and we're just sharing what we're discovering and learning and have understood.
Mm-hmm.
And we wrap up each podcast with a little bit of kirtan. So that's what we'll do now as well. And today is my turn. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn on my original sound and grab the harmonium, and we'll wrap up today's episode with some Maha Mantra. So I just spoke about it, in fact, the ultimate sacrifice of today's day and age, which is chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, which we chant a lot of. And there's a really, really beautiful, beautiful melody that I encourage everyone to go listen to. If you type in YouTube, it is Janavi Harrison, Maha Mantra. It's a recording from a gig that she did in Russia. and she sings this beautiful melody that she calls Pilgrim. So I'm going to sing that. And if you'd like to hear the full kirtan with the full melody, then you can find it on YouTube, Janavi Harrison Mahamantra in Russia. Okay. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Please chant with me. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Thank you, Madhva. Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you, Chintamani. That was a really nice episode.
I think so.
And thank you, everyone, as well. Thank you, those of you who joined us on YouTube. Again, thank you to those in the Zoom room. Please do join us for the next episode, which will be on the 2nd Wednesday of June. I actually don't know what the date is for that off the top of my head, but we will update you on our social media pages. So keep an eye out.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to end the live.
Namaste.
Thank you,
Thank
Ego.
you, Ego.